Now, one thing about risk is that it should be managed consistently. That means that an organization should have established a repeatable process for the management of risk. It's one thing to do the risk management and say, okay, here we have identified what these risks are. But then if you just walk away and say, I'm done, we did it, we don't need to look at it anymore, then you're going to lose the fact that changes in technology occur. New equipment might occur, upgrades to the program that you were examining, or to the components that you were looking at, or the processes. All of these things that are changes are something that indicates to us, I think we need to relook at the risk now that we've seen these changes. The ISACA has published a risk IT framework that is designed to help you write a risk management process model based on COVID. And the framework has several processes that it outlines for being able to set up this type of process for you. Now, one part of the process is the identification, classification of the resources that are assets that are vulnerable to threats. Now, this classification can prioritize each asset or resource, and this process can also enable a standard model of protection that needs to be applied. So what does all that mean? What it means to us is that as we're deciding that we're going to start this risk management, we're not going to start with something menial. We're going to start with what's the most important part of this process. Right? That's the identification and the classification of that resource. So, I was talking about that database of all that user account information that was hacked. And you have to ask, is that the most important piece of information for that particular company? The customers' information are the ones that purchase things and keep your company afloat. So maybe that is the most important thing, rather than worrying about some email server that you have or some DNS server you have somewhere else. And you might say, well, without DNS, you're not going to get internet connectivity, because unless you memorize IPs. Okay, yeah, we can make those arguments. But there are more supporting services. The question now is, if you lost the DNS server, you're going to have potentially a communication outage until it gets replaced. You lost the database server and my information, as well as hundreds of thousands of other people's information. What's it going to cost you to recreate that? What's it going to do to your business model and to people relying on you and trusting you and doing future business? And you understand what we're getting at. We have these ways of prioritizing. So our goal is to have the process to make that identification and be able to prioritize, which ones do we want to look at first? Which ones am I more willing to throw money at through some sort of control to mitigate that risk? Another step in this process is, of course, to assess the threats and the vulnerabilities, as well as the likelihood that they can occur. Now, a threat doesn't just mean a hacker, because I've used that example a lot. But I've also talked about, fires in buildings. So really, a threat is any event that can cause harm to a resource or information. Now, that could be simply somebody having conducted some errors. It could be errors in putting the information in. There's a lot of things that we look at to try to make sure the information that gets entered matches certain, I guess you could say, parameters, so that we know that things aren't going to be put in erroneously, that we're not going to have bad information. I talked about an example with a law enforcement agency that would have one person listed in there 5 or 6 times by just having different changes in their names, and it's like they never reconciled it with a date of birth or a social security number, which, if they had that kind of process, by the way, in the systems for that law enforcement agency, those systems could have recognized those errors and helped consolidate the records, or said something was wrong. So that's the idea. Is that there's a lot of things besides just hackers. It could be malicious damage. That would be your hackers. It could be people perpetrating fraud. All sorts of schemes out there to try to steal money. We've seen lots of ideas, some of these things called the salami attack, where they shave off, if they're doing accounting and payroll, they shave off the pennies of somebody's check and redirect those few cents into their account. And if you have 3,000, 6,000 employees, and you're getting 30 to 80 cents per employee each paycheck, you're getting a pretty good amount of money, and hoping that they're not going to notice it. So that's an alteration of the data. That's fraud. That's you could say malicious damage. It falls into the category of theft as well. But again, these are all things that can be harmful to our system. And don't forget, it could just be simple equipment or software failure. Hard drive crashes, software program becomes corrupt, needs to be reloaded. They cause damage, they can cause outages, that can affect business. And so all of these are the threats that we're talking about, not, like I said, just the hacker. Now, the relationship between threats and vulnerabilities is that when we're looking at risk, a risk occurs in that a threat might exploit a vulnerability. Now, when the threat does exploit that vulnerability, that result is called an impact. And that's what we're trying to determine. We're looking at the vulnerabilities, and of those vulnerabilities, what are the risks that we might have? If I want to keep it into operating systems, you might think of a Windows server. And, there's a number of vulnerabilities posted about different aspects of Microsoft Windows. Now, remember, it's not just the kernel of Windows. It's, problems with Office or a problem with Internet Explorer, or, problems with other applications that you purchase to run on top of Windows that might be exposing you to new vulnerabilities. That I can't really blame Windows for those things. But now that we know what those vulnerabilities are, the risk is that somebody might exploit those. And that's what we're trying to stop. So, if a threat does exploit a vulnerability and it does cause damage, we have to also determine how much damage, or since we're doing a study, what the potential impact of that damage might be. Now, once you've got all those risks established, then you're going to combine them all to get an overall view of risk. Remember, we're going to start with those highest prioritized objects first, but we're going to continue to go through that list and get this overall view of what risk is. And overall risk, you can think of it as an impact that is multiplied by the probability of the risk occurring. So again, if I have lots of different places where I see risk, each one of them could have something happen at that point. Together, that's can be an impact that is pretty widespread. So that's at least the idea. Now, you have to remember, risk will always be there. Once you've created that overall view, then what you can do is find controls that you can evaluate and see if they have the ability to reduce that level of risk. We call these controls often countermeasures or safeguards. Now, what does that mean? Well, it could just be a brand new procedure, something that you've changed in the procedures to make things safer or better in how they work. It could be a new hardware control. A hardware control could be a firewall, an antivirus scanner. A hardware control could be a new electronic key code system at the door of the server room. I mean, all of these things are types of countermeasures and safeguards we can use. And, it could be any combination of actions, devices, procedures, or techniques that make improvements about the processes as far as what can I do to mitigate risk. If you think about it, it's not as expensive, I would think, to come up with a new series of steps that can help safeguard the operations that we're using. In other words, a new procedure or changes in procedures. I know lots of people who talk about all these little loopholes that they find. I know this one person who's big on going out and getting sales, and they purposely go and look for times where people are putting the new prices on, the little gun sticking the prices on. And what they're doing is they kind of wait to see if they just get in such a hurry that they just go slam, bam, 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 and put the prices in, and they actually put a price on something else that's wrong, but it's a great deal, like a new computer for $13.99, $13.99. And so they say, oh, well, it's legally marked that. There's a little loophole, right? They were watching the procedure and, following somebody who didn't find the procedure right. It's just these types of things. You could have a better procedure or a new set of actions or devices in place to, make sure that those types of mistakes don't occur. And that can reduce risk. So once you've reduced the risk and you've got these controls, these countermeasures, safeguards in place, what risk remains, and there will always be risk. You have to remember, you cannot 100% get rid of risk. What remains is called residual risk. Now, risk management is designed to operate at many levels. At the operational level, you'd be concerned with risks that could compromise your IT systems and the supporting structures, such as the ability for people to bypass controls. At the project level, Risk management should focus on the ability to understand and manage project complexity. Otherwise, the objectives of that project might not be met. Again, notice we're talking about risk of the project management. At the strategic level, you can focus on risk, which will shift to how well IT is aligned with business strategy, right? Strategic. If IT is not helping support the business strategy, we're losing money, we're not being effective, and we cause conflict. We want the business to be successful with IT supporting it. So there's a risk that you might shift how that's done at the strategic level and not get the best out of IT that you could get to support the business strategy.